crown check? Doesn't it sound so different? Doesn't it feel so different, crown check? The beauty of your crown check is, even if you don't have your crown right now, you're still wearing it. You're still a royal priesthood. So, let us turn to the verses that we've been focusing on while our time here in Snow Camp. Does anyone want to take a shot at Isaiah 61, verse 3? Anyone show up hands? Okay. Jetty. And only because it's just Jetty. Jetty, you have to do... Oh, I was going to ask you, and he said he wants to do... I'll give it up to Jetty. All right, Jetty, you have to do the King James Version. I'm joking. Go for it.
The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me. The Lord has appointed me to deliver the good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind the brokenhearted and to proclaim liberty to those who are captive, and the opening of the prison to those who are bound. And to proclaim the year of the Lord's favors and the day of vengeance of our God, and to comfort all those who mourn, and to give to those who mourn in Zion a crown of beauty for ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the garments of praise instead of a faint spirit, so that they may be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, so that he may be glorified.
All right, so all right, since we're giving out star verse, I'm going to quote my verse, John 3:16. So today's title of the sermon is called Return of the King. For two reasons. One, because I love the Lord of the Rings. Two, because it truly is a time when we are waiting for the return of the King. I just want to say, y'all look beautiful with the crowns and the tiaras. Have you taken a look on this section on the stage and noticed your burdens here at the foot of the cross? As we move through this sermon and as we move through communion later on, I want you to keep in mind that our burdens are always at the feet of the cross. But for now, let's turn our attention to what I have here. Can we have the light similar to the way it was during worship? Just a spotlight right here. So, can you hold this for me? Awesome. Hey brother, can you hold this for me? Awesome. Can you hold this for me? So I'm handing out some ping pong balls, not because I want us to play ping pong, but I want us to talk a little bit about us. This jar represents us. And the ping pong balls inside represent the things that take up our time. Not only like physical time, like things that take an hour to do or things that take 2 hours, but also the things that occupy our mind, our thoughts. Based on my experiences with the folks in this room, I pretty much kind of get a sense that people are thinking a lot about college. They're thinking a lot about the type of school they want to get into. They're thinking a lot about Fortnite and social media. They think a lot about their parents. They think a lot about the future. And so our lives start to fill up based on the things that occupy our time and occupy our mental space. Brother, will you join me? Well, the people that I've handed ping pong to, can you join me? And so we start to fill ourselves up even more. Brother, what's one thing that you do during the week?
Watch YouTube.
Watch YouTube. And if it was me, it would be like this. Watch YouTube. Thank you. What about you?
Compose.
Compose? Music?
Yeah.
Awesome. What about you? What's one thing that you do during the week? Homework, okay. And for many of you, this is all homework. All homework. And so our life starts to take shape. And it starts to become filled based on the things that we do every single day. When we read the scriptures from chapter 61 of Isaiah, verses 1 through 3, one of the things it talks about is being a planted tree. Planted trees are firm because their roots are dug deep. Did you know that a tree is just as long below ground as it is tall above ground? If you've ever seen a picture of a fully grown tree, what we see is the ground up. What we often don't see is how deep the roots go. That's why a number of trees fall during storms, because their roots aren't deep enough. You know, one of the interesting facts about tropical trees, especially in the Caribbean, a lot of them can withstand hurricane winds because the tree digs its roots so deep until it finds a rock, a big enough bedrock, and it actually wraps its roots around the rock. So that even though this hurricane is blowing it, it doesn't fully fall. It may tip, it may teeter and totter left and right, but tropical trees actually find a bedrock deep below ground and hold on to it. And that's how we should be. Digging our roots deep, holding on to the rock that is Christ. So that whatever obstacle comes our way, whatever burden is on us, whether it be 2 burdens, 3 burdens, Jenny's mega burden, that it will push us, but we won't move away from the rock because we're holding on to it. So today I want to talk a little bit about next steps. Because if you're like me, then you may be experiencing what we call a retreat high, where it's like, oh my gosh, snow camp was amazing, I can't believe it, hashtag beauty for ashes, hashtag every day, and then by Tuesday, like, I lost my Bible. I don't know where it's at. I think I left it at snow camp. And so, I wanted to talk about some practical next steps based on the conversations that I've had with individuals here, based on the prayer cards and what we've been talking about. And so, as the top starts the slideshow, as I mentioned before, the title of this message is Return to the King. And when we look at our time, especially coming into the new year, we start to see that when we examine our lives after snow camp or after the retreat, we notice and we think that our lives are like this. Like, oh, I have some space, I have some time to fill up. This is what I'm going to use to do my Bible reading, and my prayer life, and my prayer walk. And then somehow we get on the Bible app, but then we find ourselves on the Safari app, on YouTube again. We tell ourselves we're going to compose music, or we're going to listen to worship, and then we're just live streaming for a night. Or we're on FaceTime, or we're on FaceTime, or we're on FaceTime, or we're sleeping. And if you're like me, you're sleeping. And then there are moments where we're angry at our parents. There are moments where we're angry at ourselves. We're trying so hard to go above and beyond, to live up to our parents' expectations about what we need to do for school, that it takes up so much of our time. And we convince ourselves that the only way we define ourselves is based on getting into that college, getting into that magnet school, getting into that scholarship program. That our definition of success is not based off of what Christ wants for us, but based on what makes my resume look beautiful and makes my mom happy. And so our life looks like this. One giant bowl of ping pong balls. Can I have a volunteer? Tim, can you help me out? Can you bring those 2 jugs of water over? Give it up for Tim. He's like only one of 3 people that can wear the crown without it falling. I put my crown on and it just falls right off. And so, this is our entire life right after snow camp. And when we look at it, we're like, okay, I'm going to read my Bible now. And we do this. All right, I'm going to read my Bible. Ready? And that's what we do. And we tell ourselves, all the things, all the burdens in my life, everything that occupies my mind and my time, it looks the same. But I read my Bible. It didn't change. I prayed that one time, but it didn't change. You know what? I even talked to Pastor John and Emmanuel, and it didn't change. I had Uncle Bill pray for me, and it didn't change. I went to snow camp, and it didn't change. And that's the way we picture our lives, our spiritual lives. We think because we start to read here and there and attend church here and there, that everything's going to just flow out. That all the sins are going to flow out. That our biggest burden is just going to be released. In the same way we dig our roots deep to hold on to the Lord, our sin does the same exact thing. But it holds on to us. And sometimes we hold on to it. I am a really big fan of wrestling. I love wrestling. And right now, I actually forgot to check out, and Emmanuel is such a blessed brother in helping me clean my room. And he's going to discover a wrestling toy in my room. Now don't judge me, yes, I still play with toys. But not for the same reasons. And it's something that is hard to let go. So when I think about the times that I play video games or texting, and I compare it to what I pour into my life, I start to see things move a little bit when there's more consistency. And as we talked about the other day, there's a difference between consistency and diligence. When your consistency starts transitioning to diligence, we start to see movement. And if you see closely, you start to see the ping pong balls move. Let's turn to the first slide. Routinely confess your sins to God. That's one of the most important next steps you can take after snow camp. And for all you note takers, I made a slideshow. The reason why this is important is because when you acknowledge that you have sinned and that you're a sinner before God, you're doing a number of things. You're saying, one, I'm not perfect. Two, I know who is perfect. I know who I can come to because I'm not perfect. I know who I can go to, the person that's given me my crown. Routinely confessing your sin is a form of humility. Because a lot of us struggle with pride. A lot of us hold on to titles that we have because we've been doing something for a certain amount of years, or because we got into that prestigious program, or we make 6 figures, or we make 7 figures. So I know what's best. So when we have conversation, I know what's best. And that's the posture we walk into conversations with. That's the posture we walk into discipleship with. And I'm talking to the adults in the room. And I'm talking to the leaders in the room. You don't think our young people recognize the way you walk into discipleship and mentorship? And I'm not saying we don't offer suggestions. What I'm saying is, do we honor their experience in the same way? How many times as a mentor have you acknowledged, you know what? And as the AV team transitions to the next slide, I've also struggled with that. Acknowledging your sin to others. When you're in your discipleship meetings, your mentorship meetings, are you having active conversations with your mentee about what you struggle with? And I'm not saying like talk about the sin from 10 years ago. I'm talking about what are you dealing with right now. When I asked people yesterday what their burdens were, a number of people told me things that they were currently going through. And that was beautiful. Because it's so hard to talk about what we're currently going through. It's much easier to talk about what we used to go through or go through. Crown check? Everyone crown check? So beautiful, a royal priesthood. Thank you. So as we start to do things like confess our sin to God and acknowledge our sin before others, we start to continue to pour into our lives. Next slide. Take wrong patiently. That's a doozy. One, because you have to admit that you're wrong. Two, you have to take it patiently. When two individuals are having a conversation, and one takes the posture of being prideful and the other takes the posture of being humble, it's usually the person that is prideful that has the most difficulty of being wrong. Have you ever found yourself defending an argument that you didn't believe in? But you just wanted to argue for the sake of arguing. I know a lot of people who've been in the faith for years have conversations on theological debates. And it's like, well, I know the best because I read my Bible 50 times. Well, I know the best because I read it 60 times. And we just get into these non-essential conversations that end up turning into arguments. You know that we actually do that too when we mentor young people in discipleship? This is the exact way this is supposed to happen. You're supposed to do it exactly the way I did it. And if you don't, you're doing it wrong. And it doesn't sound like that. What it sounds like is, hey, you should do this instead. Pray this prayer because that's the prayer I pray. Instead of honoring that they have an intimate relationship with God just the same way you do. There's a reason why Jesus, in all four of the Gospels, asked more questions than sharing statements. He asked questions. He explored the individual. The all-knowing God, who knew every answer to every question, still chose to ask more questions. And so we take we take wrong patiently, and we start to fill up. And as we practice these first three things, we start to notice something. We notice that some of our burdens start to fall away. That the things that used to take up our time are no longer taking up that much mental time, that much actual time. That when we start looking and reading through our Bible diligently, we start to become more connected to God and less connected to what used to take up our time. Next slide, please. Actively submit to authority. This one was easy for me growing up because my mother had this really cool thing where she would slap me upside the head if I didn't listen to her. But it was very difficult for me in church. A lot of you have your parents in church. So not only are you submitting to people and members of the church, you're submitting to your parents because they're both. Especially if your dad's the elder, or if your dad's a deacon, or if your mom is in the ministry, or if your brother leads worship. You see, for a long time, I was the only Christian in my family. So it was really easy for me to show up to church and be like, nah, I'm not doing that. Because, I love you, but I'm a grown man. And I'm saying this as an 18-year-old, as if I figured out the world. It wasn't until a brother sat me down and told me face to face, you act fake, Miguel. You are mad fake. That's what he told me. He said, you walk around prideful, acting like you know everything, but you don't submit to authority. Even more so, you won't let somebody take first place and you actively take second place. And that hit home for me. And I remember that conversation because it was at a retreat just like this, and it was almost 4 years ago. So I even started to implement the word submission into my dialogue. Because one, I wanted to take that place. How many of us purposely and actively work to submit to others? Like when you're working on a group project and someone's like, I think we should color the board yellow. And you want to color it red. For whatever reason. How many of us submit to others, especially others who are in authority? I'm not only talking about parents, I'm talking about people who are your leaders. There's a reason also that it says the good and the bad. There are leaders, and I'm not talking about spiritual leaders, I'm talking about leaders of this country, I'm talking about leaders political-wise, that will make bad decisions. Now, I'm not saying you submit to them if they're telling you to sin. In fact, that's the only time you don't have to submit to them. Anyone who's encouraging you to sin, whether they be authority, whether they be the president, whether they be your mom, and I think parents will back me up on this one. If they're encouraging you to sin, You don't have to submit to them, and you shouldn't. Because we submit to God ultimately, who is telling us to submit to our respective leaders. And when we start to submit to these leaders, we notice a shift. And we continue to pour into our lives. Next slide. Receive correction and feedback from others graciously. Part of submitting is also being able to say, what can I do to be better? What areas do I need to grow in? If your leader has been in this faith walk twice as long as you have, they may know a thing or two about how to navigate this, especially if they dealt with the same sin, especially if they dealt with the same burden. There's a beauty in being able to say, brother or sister, tell me about myself. How did I show up this weekend? How did you see me? And if Tim says, hey, I saw you sleeping in 3 out of the 6 sermons, take that graciously. 1, because it's going to be true if that was you. And the second point about that is, how are we ever growing if the only type of feedback we listen to is the feedback we give to ourselves? Now, I'm all for making sure that we tell ourselves that we're beautiful and that we're beautifully and wonderfully made. But if we don't have someone, a brother or sister, who can sit next to us and check us, there's a really famous hip-hop quote that says, check yourself before you wreck yourself. But also our community checks us. The people we love check us. Sometimes they help us in ways that we didn't even notice. And as the description up there says, there was a pastor in Phoenix that after every sermon, he would ask people for feedback. And he would say, thank you for caring enough to share that with me. I'll pray about it and get back to you. Leaders, how many times do you say that when your young people talk to you? Because, plot twist, receiving correction and feedback comes from anyone. Whether you're in leadership or not. Whether you're a believer or not. You don't think people who don't believe notice that? How graciously you take feedback? Especially if you are in a position at your job where you're the one in charge. For the last 2.5 years, I've been the director of counseling at my agency site. And one of the things I actively do is I ask my employees for feedback. Because it shifts that power dynamic. Because it's so easy to be in charge and listen to my own voice and to always assume that I'm right. But instead, when I assume that their experience is just as valid as mine, I also get to be in the position of receiving correction and feedback from others. Because they get to say, Miguel, I know you're my boss, but last week when you told me to do that task, I felt like you were too heavy. Like your tone wasn't, I took it personal. And that's partly on me. In that same way, that's partly on you. Self-reflection and community feedback are essential to the spiritual life. We self-reflect based on God's word. And when we receive correction and feedback from others graciously, we fill ourselves up. And things continue to fall away. Next slide. Seek first to understand, then seek to be understood. One of the best things my mentor ever shared. So beautiful, royal priesthood. Thank you. Seek first to understand, then seek to be understood. Seeking first to understand may be, help me to understand what you mean by this. Asking for clarity. Then seeking to be understood could be, do you know what I meant when I said this? And when all else fails, submit. Submit. Because seeking first to understand and submission work hand in hand. That's part of being humble. That's part of walking in humility. Next slide. Accept the low place. One of the things that stuck out to me in the first night, I believe, Rebecca, who is amazing, came up here. I believe it was Rebecca. and she mentioned not throwing the ramen with the water in the trash can. And it was her reason why. Does anyone remember the reason why? It was because she said the night shift, they're the ones taking out the trash. And they shouldn't have to take out the trash with so much ramen noodle water in the trash. She was thinking about people who are often perceived as the low place or having the lower place. Like when we think about a school, we think about who's in charge. Some people will say the principal. And when we say, well, who would be the opposite? Like who would be all the way at the bottom? People will say, well, the janitor. And for the adults in the room, we know the janitors make way more money than the principals. But accepting the low place, accepting the place of serving us. How many of us have actually asked the name of the staff members that serve us food? How many know John? How many of us know the people who serve us? Or do we not even think to ask their name? We might say thank you because we've regurgitated thank you. Thank you. Can I have more pancakes, please? Thank you. Can I have more waffles, please? Thank you. They wear name tags for a reason. It's dehumanizing when you don't call people by their name, which is why we focused on names in the first session. Their name means something just the same way your name means something. And word of advice, always respect the people that serve you food. Just because we think people have a low place doesn't mean that they're worthless. And I'm saying that because many of us are actually striving to be in the high place. A lot of the prayers in the prayer cards and individually have been about wanting to be successful. And a couple of people I've shared this with, what if you're not? What if God says, no, I do not want you in that college. Instead, I want you in this 2-year community college. What if God says, no, I want you in this trade school? What if God says, no, I don't even want you in school. I want you to do ministry work on the other side of the country with no educational experience? What if God just tells you no? What if God doesn't want you to be King David? What if God wants you to be like the Lord Jesus? Carpenter. A humble place. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't strive to be successful. What I'm saying is, if we set our mind and our goals solely on being successful, then we define ourselves by that. And we become hurt when we're rejected. And when we're accepted, we become prideful. But when we accept the low place, we start to see that now we're about an even place where the things of God and the things of our spiritual life are helping to push out the things that used to occupy our time. They're helping to push out our secret sin. And even when the world has pressure on your burdens, the water pushes it back up. Even when the world is pressuring you, even when your age group, when your friends are pressuring you, as long as you keep God at the center, as long as you are being diligent with your spiritual life, when the pressure releases, it's God that pushes it out. And again, this is happening over time. When I talked about my struggles with pornography, one of the things I didn't mention yesterday is that I struggled with it for like 7 years. I became a Christian when I was in high school. 7 years. I'm 27 right now. And if my victory over pornography was more than 3 years ago, let's do the math. This past November, I made 11 years being a Christian. And out of those 11 years, 7 of them I struggled with pornography. That's the majority. But out of those 7 years, the first 4 to 5 years, I did it in secret. And the last 2 years, I actually had an accountability partner. And it wasn't until I joined this discipleship program where someone checked on me every single week. Every week. And I had to be honest with them as we turn to the next slide. I had to be honest with them. And I also had to learn to associate myself with people who are in the lowly place. One of the examples I gave earlier about the janitor and the principal, some of y'all may not know this, but janitors actually make more money than principals. And they are often seen as one of the best resources because they have the keys to every single door in the school. And their titles aren't even janitors, they're actually custodians. They're unionized. They get paid double overtime every time it snows. But how many of us associate with people who we believe to be in the low place? How many of us have had a conversation with our servers outside of saying, can I have more food and thank you for the food? You know this morning I found something out about all the servers and the staff. They have been wondering why we've been carrying the burdens. They've even asked some of the other people at the table, and they were speculating that it was a fashion statement. They speculated that we didn't have enough money for name tags because they saw our names in the burdens. They had so much speculation, and they didn't know why. And so I asked them, did anyone tell you why? And she said, yeah, we asked one table and a couple of people talked to us. I said, did anyone else talk to you? She said, no. How many of us know their names and actually engage in conversation? But because we see them as serving us, they're low. So serve me, go ahead. Give me more pancakes, thank you. Bye. Does anyone here have a job or an internship? Okay. As we get into the workforce, some of the things you might do is like work at McDonald's or, for the first job, work in customer service. You're going to learn how people treat you when they think you're in a low place. I want you to remember that as we turn to the next slide. Because it's going to help us choose to serve others. It's going to help us choose to serve others. One of the beautiful things about Snow Camp and me having all these crazy ideas that God has given this team is I could be like, Tim, listen, Tim, I need a parachute, 3 gallons of ketchup, and dirty diapers tomorrow. He'll be like, listen, I don't know what it's for, but we're going to try to do it. Willing to serve others. One of the beauties of eating family style is that someone who's closest to the plate of sausages has to serve you, has to pass it to you. Are we choosing to serve others? Adults, are we choosing to serve our young people? And serve them in ways that are beneficial. Like when they have burdens on and they're in front of you and they take the burden off and you don't say anything about it? How are we serving them? And young people, how do we notice when people are trying to serve us? How many of us have actually said thank you to our parents for cooking dinner? Because if you grew up in my house, my mom had this rule called Fend for Yourself Fridays, where she didn't cook on Fridays. That was like her rule. So whatever was in the cabinet on Friday, I was 11 years old trying to make pancakes. My favorite meal for dinner on Fridays was cereal. And sometimes we had to do it without milk. How many of us are thankful for the people that are serving us? And how many of us actually see ourselves in that position to serve? You can serve being successful, but you can also serve being in a low place. This world has told us that serving is meaningless. That it's not anything. It's not worth anything. Crown check. Crown check. And if the person next to you is sleeping, raise their crown. She is knocked out. Bless her heart. Next slide. Be quick to forgive. I want to show you what being quick to forgive does. It raises it immediately. We forgive because we have been forgiven. We forgive because we have been forgiven. And when we forgive, it releases so much of a burden off of us. Especially when the other person was dead wrong. When they came at us in a way that we never thought. When they hurt us in a way that we never imagined. Especially if we love them. It hurts the most when we love them. People who are married will tell you that. When your mom and dad says something to you that hurts, or they do something, or your best friend has done something to you, and you're like, I want to forgive them, but man, what they did to me. Just because you forgive them doesn't mean that you completely trust them again. What it does is, it's actually a restorative practice. Restoring means, for example, if Tim is on this side and I'm on this side, and before he hurt me, we had a bridge. But when he hurt me, that bridge blew up. Forgiveness is repairing that bridge so that we can draw closer to each other if that's what we choose. But we're saying, sister, listen, I am sorry. How many of us use those words? Or if you grew up in the Bronx, you say, my bad. My fault. Isn't that a thing of beauty, being able to accept the low place, submit, to say that you were wrong, and to forgive others? Especially when you feel like they don't deserve forgiveness. Especially when you feel like they wronged you so bad. Especially when they don't believe that they did anything wrong. I forgive you. Well, good, because I don't even believe I did anything wrong. Is that not the way our relationship shows up with Christ? I mean, if we listed every single sin that we've done, we would still probably be missing half of them, if not more. See, sin operates in a way that is both seen and unseen. The ones we can put a name to and the ones that show up every day and we haven't put a name to it yet. But how many of our family members and people are so quick to forgive us? We forgive because we've been forgiven. Next slide. Cultivate a grateful heart. How many of us said thank you to the people who served us? How many of us said thank you to the worship team and the AV team and to your small group leader and to yourself? Cultivate a grateful heart. God, I'm thankful that you brought me to snow camp. Even though I didn't want to go. Even though my mother told me to go, and if not, she wasn't going to buy me the new DLC for Fortnite, where I could do the floss dance. How many of us are thankful? How many of us are thankful that our burdens exist, but they exist at the foot of the cross? Because that's where we are. There's a reason why I had you put your burdens here. And simultaneously, I told you that your burdens are with you. Because if your burdens are at the foot of the cross, that means you are at the foot of the cross. Constantly. Every day. All day. Hashtag. And when we cultivate a grateful heart, we see this dynamic. Look at this. The majority of your life now is filled with things of the Lord. It doesn't mean you don't have burdens. What it means is that the things that used to weigh you down are no longer existent in your life. But it still means you have things to work on and things to navigate. Brother, can you pass me like 3 or 4 of them? Now I want you to do something. No, come up here. I want you to put ping pong, those ping pongs in the water. Yeah. Do it again. Do the next one. Next one. Thank you. Give it up for Brother Dave. Did you notice when he put the first 2 ping pongs in? Even when the world tries to throw burdens at you, because you are filled up, where does it go? It flows out. God didn't promise a perfect life and an easy life. In fact, he promised the opposite. Because much of the Christian spiritual life is this. Constantly. But when you stay filled in the Lord, it bounces off of you. One of the best things about growing up was I was skinny, I wasn't this big, and we would play dodgeball, and I could literally just do this, move out of the way. Like it would just go this way, and I would go that way, and I wasn't this tall either. So it was really easy for me to move in and out. Next slide, please. Purpose to speak well of others. Purpose to speak well of others. I sat at the dinner table, lunch table, breakfast table at snow camp, and I'm going to say something. You might not like it. I heard a lot of people purposely not speaking well of each other. Now, I'm not saying that they were intentionally cursing at someone, but subtle jokes, things that we think don't hurt people about how the way they look, or what their family does for a living. I've only been here as a visitor, and I've noticed that. So if you're purposely speaking well of others, check the way you talk to somebody. What you may think is a joke may not be a joke. And just because they're laughing does not give you permission to continue the joke. You know how many Asian jokes I hear when people don't think that I'm Filipino? And I check them right away like, yo, that's not cool. And even if I wasn't Asian or Filipino, I would still check people on that. Regardless if they're Christian or not. But especially if they're Christian. Especially if you claim to know the Lord. Purpose to speak well of others. That doesn't mean you always tell them good things. Because if we look at the previous slides, one of the things it says that we offer feedback to one another. It's saying, I love you. And what I'm offering to you is to build you up. So when I tell you your breath stinks, what I mean to say is that when you preach, I can smell it from the first row. And we all have that friend that's really good at telling us that our breath stinks. They don't tell us, they just open up gum and like, you want some? And if you're like me, let me get 7 pieces, please. I need the whole gum packet. Next slide. Treat pride as a condition that always necessitates embracing the cross. Treat pride as a condition that always necessitates embracing the cross. When we fill ourselves up on the things of the Lord, we notice a stark difference between where we started and where we are. Because we're constantly pouring in. Because it's constantly coming at us, but it bounces out. It flows out. So if you're taking notes, part of taking notes is putting it into practice. Because it looks really nice in a notebook, it looks better on your spirit. And so, later when we have communion, I want you to think about the practice of filling yourself up. Because it's perfectly fine if you started out where the water was here, or here, or here. Part of being diligent is being consistent and being structured and doing it with order. Like when I first started reading the Bible, I had this thing. I don't know if you were like me, where when I first started reading the Bible, I didn't know how to read it, so I would do the thing where like, God, show me what you want me to read. And I'd be like, all right, this is what I'm reading. And I would just magically pop into 2 Chronicles with no context. You know what the awkward part was? Doing that and ending up in the book of Numbers and having to read like 2 chapters and having no context of what it is. But that unstructuredness was me pouring in. Because what that turned into was, okay, I'm not going to do that with the whole Bible, I'm just going to do it with the New Testament. I'm not going to do it with the New Testament, I'm going to do it just with the first 4 books. I'm not going to do it with the first 4 books, I'm going to do it with the first book. And I started condensing my reading plan until I finished the book of Matthew. Until I finished the book of John. Raise your hand if you finished the book of John. Gospel of John. Okay. If you're looking for a great place to start, there you go. The Gospel of John. It's in the New Testament. Use your table of contents. That's what it's there for. Even if you've been a Christian for 10 years. It's never too late. If you're looking for a place to start, use what was offered. Start at the book of John. Follow up with your small group leaders. Small group leaders, do the people in your small group know how to contact you? Do they know how to find you? And I'm not saying that they have you on Facebook. I'm talking about if they needed prayer, how can they instantly talk to you? Or do you not have the young people of your church reaching out to you for prayer? Says something about the relationship building in the church. How many people in this church can think of 3 people that they're not related to, that you will reach out in a heartbeat for prayer if something was happening? Or if you just wanted someone to talk to God about you. And in that same way, how many of us are actively praying for the people in front of us and behind us? And so, we can start here. I'm going to share with you what my new prayers are for this upcoming year. And it's actually the list that I submitted to my church. And I'll name a few. 1, I'm praying to get into a PhD program. I'm actually applying when I go home today. I've been typing while I've been at the retreat. 2, I'm praying for the salvation of my mother and father. I'm praying for the spiritual growth of my sister Christina, who, besides me, has been the only Christian in my family. I'm praying for the type of relationships that I want to foster, both in seeking a partner and 2, building better friendships. I'm praying for more experiences where I get to share like I'm sharing now, but also receive the way you're receiving. You don't have to aspire to be here. Because the truth be told, one of the best places to be is there, to receive. Next and final slide. Folks may not remember what you say to them, but they will never forget how they felt in your presence. I may not remember what I said to you at snow camp, but I remember how I felt when I walked to the cafe. Jenny, I probably won't remember much of what I told you, but I will never forget walking yesterday with you to the cabins and taking a picture of your 3 burdens. I will never forget the way I felt in your presence. And that works both ways. When you make those jokes, when you don't accept the low place, when you don't submit, people are going to forget what you said, but they'll never forget the way they felt when they stood next to you. And so I leave you with that. As we go to the last slide, I believe. The last slide is a picture of this really crazy guy who wears bow ties. I wanted to say thank you to everyone here for allowing me to just share. And in that same way, as the worship team starts to come up, I left my email address and my Instagram. I do have a prayer journal that I have. It has a list. It's really amazing. So if you want to email me random prayers, whether it be like, I need a new pair of socks, or I'm dealing with depression, feel free to reach out. I would say definitely reach out to members of your church, but if you're looking for an added layer of support, I am more than welcome to. And for the people who've been bothering me this whole weekend about my poetry, because I know that some of you know that I'm a poet, you can find a lot of it on my website, so I put my website up there as well. So as the worship team starts to play, I'm going to ask everyone to stand. And if the person next to you is sleeping, you have to carry them. Just a reminder, we're going to need some volunteers to help set up our communion. So if you want to stick around and help set up, that would be great. Let's pray. God, it's Sunday. And it feels so good to be in church on days that are not Sunday. Because we get so used to just showing up on a Sunday or a Tuesday. God, thank you for allowing us to show up multiple times a day. Because the church isn't a building, the church is the people. So thank you, Lord, for bringing us together. Lord Jesus, will you unharden our hearts? Cause us to take the low place. Cause us to take the suggestion made. Cause us to honor those who we see as low, God. To speak well of others, to take feedback graciously, Lord, especially if we're in positions of leadership. So, Lord, I pray that you will fill me up, God. Fill me up, God. Fill us up with your Spirit. And let us produce the fruits of the Spirit. Love, patience, kindness. Lord, let us produce these things. And never forget that you give us a crown of beauty instead of ashes, for our ashes. You take our burdens away. And until that day, we do this in remembrance. In Jesus' name. Amen.
From heaven to here.
Trust.